Hi friends, this is editing Kayla jumping in at the quick start of this video. I want to jump in at the beginning of this video because in my last one I said I wasn't sure what day and time I would be posting for videos going forward, but I have figured that out and I wanted to go ahead and share that with you so you had it now. I am going to be posting my weekly video on Fridays at 2 p.m. So going forward, you can expect a video upload for me to be in your YouTube queue on Fridays at 2 p.m. If I do bonus uploads, those will come on Sundays at 11 a.m. So we will see if those get there. But I wanted to put that in there right now, and I will see you guys next Tuesday. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kayla, and if you're not new, thanks for coming back. Always happy to have you. If you are new here, I do a lot of reading, book, lifestyle, writing content here on this channel. So if any of those things interest you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stick around. If you watched my last video, this is one of the pre-videos before we jump into my new filming upload schedule, which will be one video a week starting in a couple weeks. But there are some things that I need to get out of the way first before we dive into some fresh and new content, and one of those is today's video, which is a reading check-in of all of the reading I've done so far this year. June 15th, so we're like almost exactly halfway through the year, and I have read 20 books so far this year. Y'all didn't see it, but I had a goals video that I had filmed and just never got edited and uploaded, and I talked about my goals for 2024, including my reading goals. This year I decided to make a smaller reading goal compared to last year. In 2023, I wanted to read 50 books, and I read more than that. I gotta look at what I actually ended up reading. I read 50 books last year, but my goal was 45, and I read 50, which is almost one book a week, which is crazy, especially given what my life was last year. Editing Kayla jumping on in once more. I did want to say and want to name that, given my word of the year being intentional, honestly, what I read is what I read. I'm not really super pushing towards a number goal for reading, and if you're not either, that's totally fine. Reading is supposed to be enjoyable. It's a hobby, it's a pastime. It's not supposed to feel like work. It's not supposed to feel like a competition. So if you didn't set a reading goal this year, props to you. If you are not able to keep up with your goal or you're feeling behind, don't stress about it. Reading is supposed to be happy. Reading is supposed to be escapism. It's supposed to be enjoyable. And quite frankly, I would not have done nearly as much reading as you are going to see me talk about in this video if I was not taking young adult literature. If I was not taking one of my master's classes that mandated that I read a single book every single week, I wouldn't be reading nearly as much. So don't feel bad about your goal. Don't feel bad about your reading. Be proud of what you've read. Be happy with what you've read. Reading is a happy hobby. It is not your job. It's not a stress. It's not a competition. Don't make it one if you don't want it to be one. Okay, back to the video. A lot of the time though last year, I felt like I was like really pushing and rushing myself to read, just to read another book and get closer to that goal. This year I decided not to give myself a crazy pressure to read a bunch, especially because my goal may have been 45 on Goodreads last year, but in the back of my head, I kept pushing myself to read to 50. So I was like, you have to read more, you have to read more, you have to read more. This year, my word of the year was intentional. So I wanted to be a lot more intentional about a lot of things in my life, but reading is definitely one of them. So the goal I set for this year was 40 books, a little bit less, but I wanted to be really intentional about what I read. Now, we are making good progress on the reading front. I've read 20 of 40 books so far this year, and I am 2 books ahead of schedule. The intentional part has not quite been achieved. Going into summer break, going into this new stage of my life, teaching high school, I am hoping that I get to have a little bit more fun, relaxed reading time, especially this summer. I have so many books that I want to read, that I want to get through. Oh my god, you have no idea. Yesterday was my last day of school and I am like racing to go do homework so I can go read. That intentionality piece I think is really going to come through in the last half of the year. Because I've read 20 books and we have 20 books to talk about, I'm going to try and keep my reviews, thoughts on them very, very brief. So we're going to go through it. I also don't have a lot of these anymore, so I will be putting pictures up on the screen. The first book of the year I started strong with a reread, and that was Shiver by Maggie Stiefvater. In my winter recommendations book, I think I did talk about Shiver because Maggie Stiefvater and Shiver and I have a very, very long history. Shiver was the first Maggie Stiefvater book that I ever read back in middle school, and I was freaking obsessed. It was like a cringy, unhealthy obsession. It was my intro to kind of like the fantasy sphere werewolf vampire situation. Not that there are vampires in Shiver, but werewolves for sure, or wolves for sure. So I started with Shiver. It follows Sam and Grace who live in Minnesota. Grace was bitten by a wolf when she was younger, and it turns out that these wolves are really just people that when the temperature drops, they turn into a wolf. Sam is one of those wolves, and they've been kind of watching each other from afar and have had this like natural connection their whole lives. And then one winter, Sam turns back into a human too early and they fall in love. There's also a point at which werewolves stop turning back into humans, and Sam knows that this is kind of his last year being a human, so they are trying to find a cure so he can stay there forever. I of course rated this 5 stars. I loved this book the first 4 times that I read it. I loved it again this time. Then when I got my Kindle for Christmas, I did go down the rabbit hole of like the top book talk books all the Kindle girlies were talking about, and one of them was A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This is a Hades and Persephone retelling. I quite did not enjoy it. I read it really quickly and like loosely kind of enjoyed it, but everybody was like, this is the spiciest book I've ever read and this is incredible, and I was like, I'm missing the memo. Basically, it's a modernized retelling of, or not really even a modernized retelling, it's weird. It is a retelling of the Hades and Persephone's myth, but Persephone is like a college student at New Athens University or something. It was giving Miami, it was giving Tampa, and I didn't like it all that much. And Hades was like a club owner, but also still the lord of the underworld. Strange. I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Messy Roots by Laura Gao. This was a graphic memoir of a Wuhanese American citizen. It was very interesting to read, especially because I went into it with kind of all these preconceived notions or expecting it to be about Wuhan and more of the pandemic, but it was really just about Laura's experience being born in China, adapting to culture here in America when she eventually moved here, and then kind of like figuring out how to be both at the same time and how to keep both of our cultures at the same time. I really liked it. I thought it was beautifully illustrated and beautifully done. The messaging was really cool, and I felt connected to it in a lot of ways that I didn't anticipate before. That was my first book that I read for school, and I gave that one 4 stars. Then we read Tomboy by Liz Prince, and this was another graphic memoir all about Liz Prince's personal experience being and growing up a tomboy when people weren't super accepting of, like, not that they necessarily are today, but people who dress and act outside of their gender norms. And she talks about how difficult that was for her and how out of place and lonely and isolating it was. I didn't quite like this one. I gave it 3 stars. I just felt that, like, I know it was a memory of her experience as a teenager, but she was just a little bit insufferable. I can't even lie to you. This Is How It Always Is by Lori Frankel. I read as well for class. I will tell you which ones are not for class, but this is about a family and a child named Claude who was born a boy, but eventually develops a different gender identity and goes as Poppy. But really it's told from the perspective of their parents and not from themselves. And I would have loved to hear more from Poppy directly instead of always hearing about Poppy and their experiences and their thoughts and feelings through the mouth of somebody else. Gave it 3 stars. True Biz by Sarah Novick was one I did not ever hear about before, but I was really excited to read for class. This was about, what's her name? This is about Charlie, who is deaf and is transferring to an ASL school, like a school for the deaf. And it was just super interesting because she was given a cochlear implant and it didn't always work super right, and it was kind of, you know, negatively impacting her life. She never fully learned ASL, so she didn't feel like she had access to that aspect of deaf culture and the deaf community. And it really brought up this interesting argument about how with these technological advances, the deaf community and deaf culture is being erased, which as a hearing person, I never realized. But it was super interesting to me to hear about this and read about it and learn about it, because I've always thought that like cochlear implants, everybody wanted them and to be able to hear, but to have that different perspective of like, not everybody who is deaf wants to eventually be able to hear. Some people are perfectly fine using ASL and being part of the deaf community and maintaining their deaf culture. So it's super interesting to read. The 57 Bus, this was a true story that we read about an incident that happened back in California where an agender person, an agender student, was riding a bus home from school, and another student from a different school lit their clothing on fire, kind of thinking that they would like wake up and be able to put them out, but they got severely burned. And this was kind of like a national news story, but this is a I don't want to call it a memoir because it's not any of them who wrote it, but it is an account of that whole story. I gave this 4 stars. It was told in a really interesting format and it was something I hadn't really heard about, but I feel like from both perspectives it left a little bit to be desired. Then I read a book for fun. Shocker. This was thank you to February break, but I read the 4th Bridgerton book. I skipped the 3rd one. So I've read 1, 2, and 4, but I wanted to read the Penelope and Colin Bridgerton story before the series came out, before the season of Bridgerton came out. Part 2 just came out a few days ago and I haven't watched it yet. I gave this 4 stars. I definitely thought this was definitely better than the 1st and the 2nd one. I think they are progressively getting better. I really enjoyed Penelope and Colin's love story. I just personally don't, especially after watching the show, I don't really like Colin that much. I like Penelope as Lady Whistledown. I think that's really cool of her. But Colin I was just never into, and he was very much like the baby-faced little brother that was supposed to be like sweet and wholesome. So for him to be sexy is weird. Gave it 4 stars. Back to school reading. I read Probability of Everything by Sarah Everett. This is a middle grade book, but it was really, really beautifully done. It deals with this girl named Kemi who's going through, Kemi, who is talking about how an asteroid is about to hit Earth and life as they know it is about to end. The Earth is supposed to explode. Her whole world is about to blow up. She's trying to create a time capsule, so when people discover this Earth again, they have memories and are able to learn about all the people that she's loved. Really, this is a whole experience that is a metaphor for something bigger that's happening in her life, but it is such a beautiful and like heart-wrenchingly honest account of coping and of grief, and it was just so well done. I gave that one 5 stars. The next book that we read I also really enjoyed, and that was The Disappearing Act by Jordan Castle. This is a memoir told in verse, which as a poet myself I very much enjoyed reading. Jordan Castle's father was convicted of a fraudulent crime when she was growing up, and this is her story of how she dealt with all of that, the stress that it put on her family, realizing she didn't really want to be around her father and how that relationship was broken, and also just like kind of healing herself from that traumatic experience, told through really lovely verse. It was a kind of really connective experience for me. She talks about processing through writing verse. And that was exactly what I have done in the past and what poetry does for me, and it inspired a beautiful project for me to complete. Super interesting concept, super beautifully written. I also talked about in my project, in my response paper, there were plenty of poems where she left a bunch of blanks, and it was very fun and very engaging to kind of like try and guess what she was saying there, or what she would have said, or plug different things in with that meaning. So, and I don't know how I made this one happen, but I did it. I read Bride by Allie Hazelwood. I'm sensing a theme in my reading this year. We have werewolves and vampires yet again. This is a weird fantasy romance, and I'm just gonna name that it's strange, and I'm a little embarrassed to tell you that I read it, truthfully. When it came out, it was like the epitome. Like, everybody was like, this is the hottest book I've read in a minute. It is spicy, and it was just kind of weird and icky for me. I'll be honest about that. This was spice I don't need. Thank you so much. But it's a weird dystopian universe where this vampire has to marry the werewolf alpha for the peace of their nations. And of course it's like an enemies to lovers, but then they really are mated and fated and fall in love, and it's just a whole bunch of nonsense. And I gave it 3 stars. In retrospect, that still makes me feel icky, and also it has a 4.06 overall. Guys, get it together. Then back to class reading, I read Look Both Ways, A Tale Told in 10 Blocks by Jason Reynolds. I did not like this book. It was very short. It was a middle grade. It goes through different perspectives of kids who live in different blocks around a school and what their experience were. It felt very much like a short story anthology, which it kind of was, but it wasn't at the same time. And I hate short story anthologies. I really do. I'm like, give me more. I don't want the little snippet. It always leaves something to be desired for me. So I gave this one 3 stars. This book was so beautiful and gut-wrenching, and I read it for class, and it was just so good. And it is called Free Lunch by Rex Ogle. I gave it 5 stars. It is his heartbreaking memoir in verse, where he talks about his experiences growing up in a free lunch program, being poor, and like the abuses he faces at the hands of his mother and his stepfather, and just how he struggles in that way. And his writing is like guttingly beautiful. So I gave that 5 stars. Along the same lines, from class, we talked about other books by the same author that talked about other difficult kind of topics and themes. And another book that came up is called A Boila Don't Forget Me, and by Rex Ogle, and it's about how impactful his grandmother was in his life through those hardships. And it's just really beautiful and written in the light of his grandmother passing from dementia, and it's just such a beautiful homage to her. And like, it just made me love my grandma and my abuela like all the more, and just appreciate her all the more. And it's beautiful. Then I read Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. This I like knew was a show, and I knew it was really hyped and really popular, but I never had an urge to read it. And I like flew through this graphic novel. It was so good. I was just like rooting for them so hard, for Nick and Charlie. And I did start watching the show, but I haven't finished it. But I think I am going to be watching that tonight, because I'm like, oh, thinking about it, I'm like, I want to know what happens. I did go ahead and read the second one. Did I mark this? I did mark the second one. I read the first and second right away. My classmates did tell me that the further on you read, there are some trigger warnings, so I would need to do some research before continuing. But their love story was just so wholesome and whimsical and cute. And it's just like, for me, felt like reading those 2 books and watching their love story kind of develop. Like, it felt like any other heterosexual teen romance that is turned into a Netflix special that gets all the airtime, like To All the Boys I Loved Before and The Kissing Booth and all these things. It just felt like a really positive representation of just like two teen kids falling in love. They just happened to be gay, and I really appreciated that. So I gave that 5 stars. Next I read Chaos Theory by Nick Stone. I'm a big Nick Stone fan. I loved Dear Martin. I loved Dear Justice. I didn't read Jackpot, but I have it, I think. But I picked up this one. This is about 2 characters. I'm blanking on their names. But I read it 2 months ago. Shelby is one. Andy's his name. One is an alcoholic, and one has a mental health disorder, and they meet and are able to support each other through their challenges. It just felt a little like one-sided. It wasn't my favorite book ever. I gave it 4 stars, but now that I'm thinking retrospectively, it's probably like a 3-star. Because I also don't think that they needed to fall in love. They had this whole pretense that they had to be friends, but they very clearly were into each other the whole time. So it just felt a little bit silly. Then I read Breathe and Count Back from 10 by Natalia Sylvester, also for class. This is about a girl who has a condition. She has hip dysplasia, but she wants to be one of those like mermaid performers that's in like lagoons and theme parks and stuff. And she has like very traditional Peruvian parents who immigrated here and have very, very strict expectations and traditions and rules for her, and don't want her to pursue this. And she has this love interest and a friend and her sister who kind of support her in pushing her towards her dreams, but she's kind of battling these 2 cultural identities, but also learning to be herself and to go for what she wants in her life. We're almost there. 2 more. The last book I read for class was The Door of No Return by Kwame Alexander. This is a historical fiction book told in verse, beautifully written, about the transatlantic slave trade. I want to say he's Ghanaian, but I don't think he is, but an African boy who is in this village and is taken by other African people and put into the slave trade. And he has to he's ripped from his family. He's had, traumas happen in his family that he's now leaving behind. He's completely alone and very much missing his village and his family and his home life. And also just so unsure of what's awaiting him on this ship. It was just so beautiful, and it felt like so beautifully written and so raw and real, and it felt like stepping back in time and looking through the eyes of somebody going through that experience. And it's not totally historically accurate. There are some discrepancies between real history of the American slave trade or real history of the Atlantic slave trade and this book. There is a sequel to it, but I have not read the sequel. The last book that I read, which I don't really know how I read this. I read Happy Place by Emily Henry. I am very much behind on the Emily Henry bandwagon, and for a stupid reason. I just like that I have all of the books that I have of hers are in paperback, so I wait for them all to come out in paperback. But I had Happy Place, and I just really needed in the trenches of the end of the school year, I needed a happy, lighthearted romance, and this freaking delivered. This follows Harriet and Wynne, who were in love, were engaged, who go on a family trip or a friend trip every single year to this town in Maine. They have broken off their engagement, but they haven't told anybody, but they all still have to go to the house in Maine because it is the last one. The house is being sold. They won't be able to go back to this place in Maine, so they need to go back to their happy place one more time, and they have to pretend that everything is fine, and slowly fall back in love. And it is just so beautiful. And I was texting my sister did you also cry? In their heartfelt emotional conversations, I was just sobbing, purely sobbing on my couch. I did film a read with me for Happy Place, so that will be coming up next Thursday, so get ready for that. But oh my God, it was so beautiful, and it made me feel like I was in Maine. Maine is one of my favorite places in the whole wide world. So I felt like I was there, like drinking blueberry lemonade and eating a lobster roll and just like in the misty beautifulness that is Maine, and it was freaking incredible. Like, I was so sucked into this book. I had to know what happened. I think I read it in literally 3 days, and it was glorious. It was so beautiful. I like made a playlist. I made a drink to go with it. I made like a blueberry lemonade spritzer with it. This book is so far, I think, my favorite book that I've read this year. I mean, it's kind of hard when I've only read, I think, 5 books for funsies, but I still, like, it counts, okay? It's my favorite book of the year so far. But I have picked up and I've started other things that I just haven't finished. Last year, I read I listened to a lot of audiobooks. I'm trying to get back into it, but I've just really struggled with that this year. My commute has also just been hellish, so I just kind of need to sing songs, or I need to watch Critical Role and watch D&D while I'm driving. So I'm currently reading God Killer by Hannah Kaner. I'm hoping to finish that very soon, and then I have a Holly Jackson to read, and I'm also reading a Christina Lauren for some romance sprinkled in there. But that is everything that I have read so far this year. That is all 20 books that I have read and enjoyed so far in 2024. Let me know in a comment down below, what are you reading? What have you been reading? What is your favorite book that you've read so far this year? Is there anything that I should add to my list? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in my next one very, very soon. Have a wonderful day wherever you are, and happy reading. Bye-bye.